Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. On this episode, we're diving into the lifeblood of Vladimir Putin's regime, the Russian economy, and how it's transforming from a fuel-pumped war machine into a slowly deflating hot air balloon. Russia's economy is slowing down, which is just surprising because it's mostly powered by war, propaganda, and black market drone parts. After 3 years of military-fueled GDP high, the Kremlin's economic engine is finally coughing up smoke, and not the kind that they used to hide missile launchers. So the question isn't just, can Russia afford to keep this war going? It's rather, how long can it keep up the facade? So to find out what happened, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
A rare event has taken place, as official Russian government data seems to be honest for once. The country's state statistics office, Rosstat, says that the country's economy is experiencing a slowdown. Apparently, Russia's GDP growth has dropped to just 1.4% in the first quarter of 2025. In the previous quarter, the Russian economy had grown by 4.5%. These numbers are below expectations and seem to show that the war and sanctions are taking a toll on the Russian economy. Another reason for this poor economic situation, according to analysts, are the policies of the Russian central bank, such as very high interest rates. Despite posturing as a strong economy in the face of Western sanctions, Moscow may be finally letting something slip in regard to the actual situation.
So they cannot sustain this level of investment in war, but on the paper they're saying that they can, but that's not what the reality is.
Ever since the start of the invasion of Ukraine, the Russian economy has been transforming into a wartime one. It has become focused on military production. Coupled with a long list of Western sanctions and the withdrawal of various consumer brands, this means that even ordinary Russians have been affected. While the Russian man is well known for his resilience in the face of economic adversity in times of war, at some point you can't feed your family with bullets and tanks. No matter what history may have shown, this is not 1942, and Russia is not the one fighting for its survival.
And now let's zone in on the explaining portion of our show. One of the main ways in which the West has responded to the Russian invasion of Ukraine is package after package of sanctions. Yet the desired outcome of these sanctions is far from what many, including Ukraine, may have hoped for. Here's more.
To say that Western sanctions have had little impact on the Russian economy would be an unfair statement. There are 16 sanction packages from the European Union, a multitude of sanctions from the United States and the United Kingdom. Arguably, such measures would have brought any country to its knees long ago. So how come is Russia still trudging along? Despite a recent slowdown, the Russian economy has been growing faster than some Western ones. This resilience, analysts say, stems from a few factors. Increased defense spending, it's told being another story, various import substitution programs launched by the Kremlin, and local consumption are deemed to be leading ones. Russia has expanded its reach to new markets with Asia, and has turned to countries like China and India to make up for some of the losses to Western markets. Trade routes have been rerouted. What's more, Moscow has also been circumventing some of the sanctions with various schemes, like its shadow fleet of oil tankers, which numbers in the hundreds. Yes, Russia is most definitely not as strong as it would be without these sanctions, but alas, it is far from crippled.
And now let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Russia has pumped so much money into its military-industrial complex that it now resembles an economy designed by a guy whose childhood dream was a world of tank factories. Civilian sectors, however, not so lucky. Industrial production outside of defense is contracting, with civilian output falling every single month in 2025's first quarter. And that's just the start. Construction material production, down. Machine manufacturing, down. Electrical equipment output, down. 3 months in a row. Meanwhile, inflation is finally slowing, but only because demand is also collapsing. We're talking about GDP that shot up to 4.5% in late 2024, only to slide down to around 2% by early 2025. Now that's like guzzling Red Bull for a week, then crashing into Monday with nothing but expired military rations and ruble-backed bonds. Oh, and let's not forget Russia's interest rates, which are currently sitting at a blood-curdling 21%. Now, Putin, the economic visionary, tried to spin this slowdown as a good thing. He said, and I quote, "Strange as it may sound, we don't really need growth like that right now," which is code for we spend all our money on bombs, so please stop asking for roads and schools. But the war isn't the only villain in this budget horror show. The second killer is oil. Remember when sanctions were supposed to crash Russia's energy exports? Well, they didn't, at least not at first. In 2022, global prices shot up, and Russia made a cool 155 billion euros in energy revenue. But now, oil prices are plummeting. Brent crude is expected to hit just $67 per barrel, while Russia's heavily discounted oil is hovering around $50. And it gets worse. Russia's gas exports to Europe, almost gone. From 46 billion euros in 2021 to just 16.6 billion in 2024. Even the last pipeline through Ukraine has been shut down, and that's another 4.5 billion a year. Just poof, disappear, like Wagner Group pension plans. So what's the Kremlin doing about this? Well, raising taxes for one. Profit tax now stands at 25%, and while social spending gets quietly slashed, military spending stays sacred. So they're cutting school budgets so they can keep firing shells at Kharkiv. The economy may be slowing, but it's not collapsing, at least not yet. So as Russia's economy shifts from mobilization to maintenance mode, remember this. The Kremlin isn't trying to win peace, it's trying to buy time. And the only thing more dangerous than a dictator with nuclear arms is a dictator with a calculator and a clock that's ticking. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Vladimir Dubrovsky, senior economist at CASE, Ukraine Center for Social and Economic Research. Hello, sir, and welcome to Eastern Express.
Hi.
So today we're trying to dissect a very complex Russian economy. Since turning into a wartime economy, we'd imagine the GDP to go downhill, take a nosedive very soon. But we see in the initial phases, it actually does seem like Russian economy is doing pretty well until it didn't. What contributes to the initial boom, and what happened now?
The main factor behind this boom was perhaps so-called military Keynesianism. So Russia kept very strict monetary and fiscal policy for many years, and it loosened it rapidly when the war started. So it created indeed an economic boom. Also, the oil revenues for 2022 appeared record in the Russian history because the prices were very high, and the European countries still did not introduce their embargo at that time. So Russia sold its oil to both to the EU and China and India and the whole world. These factors are short-living. The oil boom is already over, and this military Keynesianism is reaching its logical end as a kind of economic boom. It goes to the burst. So the inflation is high and is going to be higher, despite very high interest rates, and the fiscal balance is in red. It is in red for all of the years, and now the critical point is that the reserves that Russia has accumulated for 10 years are exhausting. So if the oil prices would be at present level during the whole 25th, then Russia will spend all of its so-called national wealth fund by the end of the year.
Right. So like I mentioned, oil is a very big aspect of Russia's economy. Do you think the new U.S. President Donald Trump's policy of drill, baby, drill, and kind of supplying the market with new supply of oil is actually going to be very impactful for how Russia will be able to sell theirs?
Not yet. First of all, drilling takes time. Mm-hmm. And secondly, the American oil is a shale oil. It is very costly, mm-hmm. and the price is lower than $50 per barrel. It becomes uneconomic. So unfortunately, the prices would not be lower than now if Americans will drill more. They will be lower than now if Saudis would supply more. That's right. But perhaps Saudis will also not do it because they also do not need very low prices. So there is also oil price cap that should be applied to the Russian oil products and crude oil. And it is now working poorly, but it should be enforced and it should be lowered in order to make Russian oil marginally economic. So the budget would not receive anything and the producers would barely cover their costs. It can happen at prices much below present level, like 25 or 30 dollars per barrel, but there would be prices only for the Russian oil, not for all kinds of oil.
And also recently we saw the European Union pass another package of sanctions, the 17th one actually already. Do you think this is going to have enough of an economic impact on Russia? And well, we've seen so many iterations of sanctions, some more effective than the others. How effective do you think that is still as a tool to try to contain Russia's economy?
There were a lack of political will in applying full-scale sanctions to Russia. Now, I hope that political will is already here, and at last, the European countries in the second package are going to lower the price cap, because price cap at the level of 60 now does not make sense. Russian oil is being sold at 55 or less dollars per barrel. And the oil price cap should be lowered, and it should be lowered significantly. And then there will be indeed a very big impact. It is already some impact of the oil price cap and other sanctions. For example, Russia cannot produce as much weapons as it would like to due to the sanctions. This production is much more costly than it would be otherwise. But this is not enough to undermine Russian economy and especially political economies, undermine the Putin's regime. Unless Putin would see the threat that is equal to the threat of for his regime out of spending war in Ukraine without reaching all of its goals, it would not. He would not stop the war, because its main goal is to keep his regime at power. And if he stops the war right now without reaching of its goals, it would undermine his regime.
All right. Now, the U.S. President Donald Trump also mentioned perhaps being able to put on sanctions on Russia as well if peace negotiation doesn't come into fruition. Do you think this sanction will have a better effect on impacting the Russian economy, especially with the mention of secondary sanctions? Do you see that as an effective tool to contain Russia's economy?
I think secondary sanctions are a very good thing. But if you mean the bill that is now in the American Congress about sanctions against Russia, with 500% import tariffs on the goods from the countries buying Russian oil, I think it's unrealistic, because in practice it would mean that the U.S. would have to impose these sanctions on their best friends in Europe, Slovakia and Hungary. They would have to impose them on India, China, Turkey, the countries that have very high geopolitical weight, or very heavy geopolitical weight. And they would not dare to quarrel with those countries because of Russian oil. So I think that this is rather unrealistic, and it would be good to concentrate, to focus on enforcement of the oil price cap, particularly closing the Baltic Straits for the shadow fleet tankers, and imposing some schedule of inevitable lowering of the price cap in case Russian troops are still in Ukraine, and Russia do not agree on any kind of peace.
Right. We're observing these peace negotiations go forward, and it's very clear that Vladimir Putin has no intention of actually achieving a sort of ceasefire. But can the Russian economy realistically sustain this prolonged, drawn-out battle? With their economy already taking a downturn, how long can they sustain this?
Russian economy is pretty much resilient as long as it has quite big and resilient private sector. But now the internal processes in Russia are unsustainable, at least in the long run. There is a massive redistribution of assets in the Russian economy and massive replacement of the elites. And this creates huge tensions, not in the economy per se, but in the political economy, in the regime's supporters and possible supporters. And I think that these trends could eventually result in some maybe hope, maybe some else kind of disturbances in the Russian political, economic, and social environment. And the West could speed up this process by sanctioning Russian economy and tightening the grip of oil price cap and other sanctions. But it is reluctant to do it because it is afraid, particularly the US, are afraid of any disturbances in Russia.
And so do you think that this will eventually have a ripple effect that would impact its own kind of political class?
I think it would have impact on regime stability. But the question is how soon it will happen.
Right, so a lot of it also depend on time as well. Thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it, and thanks for being with us on Eastern Express.
Thank you.
Cheers. And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. Russia seems to be up to no good once again. A recent New York Times report is warning of a Russian military buildup on the country's border with Finland.
NATO officials have reportedly described the recent movements by the Russian military as the early stages of a more long-term build-up. These various construction sites along the border come in the wake of Moscow's announcement that it will expand its military and create entirely new units in response to both Finland and Sweden joining the North Atlantic Alliance. The two countries joined NATO after the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022. As of now, the build-up seems to concern aerial equipment such as helicopters and long-range bombers at air bases not far from Russia's borders with Finland and Norway. There have also been reports of troop deployments to former Cold War-era bases, though none of these have been deemed to be on such a scale as to suggest an incoming attack in the near future.
Russia has labeled the human rights group Amnesty International as an undesirable organization. Now, this comes as Moscow is set on continuing its crackdown on Russian civil society.
By labeling Amnesty International an undesirable organization, Russian authorities have effectively outlawed the group in the country. Any association with it is punishable under Russian law. The country's prosecutor general says that the decision was made due to Amnesty International allegedly being in the center of, quote, preparation of global Russophobic projects. Russia has also accused the group of working to help intensify a military confrontation and of trying to justify the alleged crimes of supposed Ukrainian neo-Nazis. Moscow has often reached for the narrative of Ukraine being run by neo-Nazis and radicals to justify its unprovoked invasion of the country. The undesirable organization law itself has been in effect in Russia since 2015 and is focused on targeting organizations that receive funding from foreign sources. It is widely regarded as a tool that the Kremlin uses to crack down on dissent.
Moscow is all in when it comes to reviving the Soviet-era Intervision song contest. Pro-war singer Shaman will be the country's representative in the first edition of the renewed competition.
Vladimir Putin seems to have taken his country's expulsion from the Eurovision Song Contest very personally, so much so that he has fallen back on one of his favorite pastimes. digging up best left forgotten ideas from amid Soviet cultural ruin. The Intervision is one such idea. This year's edition will be the first since Russia was banned from the ESC over its invasion of Ukraine. Yaroslav Dronov, better known under his stage name Shaman, is one of wartime Russia's most recognizable celebrities. His pro-war pop songs, such as I'm Russian and My Fight, are meant to invoke pro-Russian patriotic moods. Intervision's organizers claim that 20 countries have confirmed their participation in the event, though for now only Kyrgyzstan and Russia itself have announced their contestants.
That's all on this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.